South Africa held its 10th BRICS summit last month. 3 memoranda of understanding were signed between South Africa and India, which will see the establishment of the Gandhi Mandela Center of Specialization for Artisan Skills, the development of partnerships in the field of space exploration, and the promotion of human resource development in the agricultural sector. To talk more about the BRICS Summit, I'm joined now by economic analyst Tsepo Kgadima. Tsepo, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening, and thanks and good evening to the viewers of AfroWorld View.
I want to talk about BRICS in a couple of respects. The first one being its potential for trade and driving trade amongst the BRICS countries, and with a particular focus on South Africa, of course. And then secondly, a little bit more generally about what benefits South Africa can derive from being a part of BRICS. Starting off with the trade element, as you well know, South Africa is a very small part of the import and export within the BRICS bloc. So clearly there's an opportunity there of expanding our participation both in terms of exports and imports. How do we do that?
Well, I think South Africa, we have a very unique opportunity to be able to capitalize on our membership of BRICS. Even though we are smallest nation, both in terms of people as well as the economy of South Africa is the smallest in all of the 5 BRICS member states. But what must at all time be looked at as a very advantageous geostrategic positioning we have is that we have both the Atlantic Ocean as well as the Indian Ocean, and all of the world's trade goes through here. So there are a number of ways we can be able to maximize in terms of our membership. First and foremost, I think being a member state of the BRICS nations gives us a unique opportunity to be able to really bring into focus and to bring to fruition the blue economy, which we've spoken about is part of the 9-point plan, which this government has for a long time now been wanting to see going. So the blue economy is certainly where we can be able to use that positioning in terms of geographically, as I say, because of the maritime waters that we have, we can be able to do a lot in that respect. In terms of trade, yes, the question is that, is there trade happening now? The trade is skewed more towards China and India, and then a little bit with Russia, a little bit with Brazil. Yeah. So in the greater scheme of things, the question is that, well, what type of trade is happening? If you look at the numbers, we have a very large trade deficit with China, meaning China, they really supplies us with a lot more things. So I think one of the things that we can do is that already we have proved that we are a market that is worthy of being looked at by a nation such as China. Yeah. We can therefore be able to start demanding that a number of things be manufactured. So we can be able to use our trade relations to be able to give impetus to our own industrial strategy of ensuring that there is more manufacturing, there is more industry, and ensure that the goods that we trade, both with the BRICS member states, with the Europeans, with the Americans, a number of them start to be not just assembled, but manufactured in South Africa. But I have to also put this rider on that we have to choose our battles very carefully, or our, which battles we're going to be fighting. I believe that we have to look at those areas whereby we have a unique advantage. In the area of, perhaps if you talk about manufacturing of textiles, China is a factory to the world. We can't be able to compete. But if you're talking about in terms of components for the auto sector, I think there's a unique opportunity there. For example, we are the world leaders in terms of platinum group metals. We are the world leaders. So whether you're talking about fuel cell technology, which a lot is being spoken about, whether you're talking about catalytic converters coming from platinum group metals, as the world leader in terms of that reserves, there's a lot that we can start now to design, engineer, and manufacture, and then supply to other automakers as well as auto assemblers, be it in India as well as in China. China, bearing in mind that annually they sell over 18 million vehicles. Those 18 million vehicles, you find that anywhere between 16 to 17 million is actually vehicles that are fossil fuel. They are powered by either diesel or petrol. You're going to need a catalytic converter to be able to clean up the air. So that's an area where we have got a unique competitive advantage that no other of the BRICS member states have, save for Russia, which has got palladium, a little bit of platinum, but we are the world leaders. If you look in the area of agriculture, for example, livestock, there's a lot that we can do. So I think in terms of trade, certainly BRICS offers us a unique opportunity, which I feel that at this point in time we have not yet started to take full advantage of.
One of the questions that I've heard asked before about BRICS is that these are 5 nations that have vast differences in a lot of areas. Differences in population sizes, spread quite wide apart around the globe, have very different political systems and governance systems, very different economic systems. So in a sense, what you can't get with BRICS, or at least not easily, is a bloc like the EU, for instance. How do these 5 nations actually create a collective that has the same sort of impact as an EU might have, right, without having the geographic and social and political proximity?
I think that for that to be realized, I've mentioned it consistently that I think one of the weaknesses currently with BRICS in the manner which it is structured and functions is that it doesn't have a secretariat. You speak about the EU, for example. You know that Brussels effectively does all the coordination of what the geo-economic aspirations of all of the 27 member states of the EU desire. If you look at even, for example, the Trans-Pacific that Donald Trump says he wants to pull out of for reasons of saying, look, we're now going to be looking inward and make sure that everything is made in America, which is a mission impossible on its own. But again, there is that system of administration. Behind all of this, you need an administration that can ensure that in between summits, you are already having action plan. But you're quite correct. One of the things that is going to perhaps delay the progress that can be made, or the pace of progress we make in as far as realizing what BRICS can do, is going to be this exceedingly varied or very diverse political systems. You look at Brazil, for example, maybe you might say something similar to us. India, it is the largest democracy in the world. But again, you have to bear in mind that India is a very federal state. So there are a lot of things that happen at the state level which many times impede what nationally the government might want to do, or they carry out the obligations it might have agreed to on multilateral organizations such as a BRICS, for example. China, on the other hand, a lot more easier in terms of decision-making processes, except they have got an ingredient of time. So when looking at China, it's not just one thing that you can say can be sorted out through an election or having a political leader who has got a particular approach towards governance. But in that, the system there does have an ingredient of time. That simply means that it's going to be some time before we can say, look, we are seeing the full benefits of BRICS. However, we have to bear in mind that we already have got bilaterals with all of the BRICS nations. You've just alluded to the bilaterals we've signed with India in the area of arts and culture, for example, and having those cultural exchange programs. We should, as South Africa, start to see how do we then leverage off those bilaterals, but with the understanding that the end game, the greater objective, is that of a functioning BRICS nation. So one thing that came out in this 10th BRICS summit here in South Africa was the fact that most of the resolutions that the leaders have taken indeed have been brought into fruition. So that is something to be celebrated. But I'm making a submission that if then you include a secretariat that is well-resourced, that is empowered, that has got delegated authority from the heads of state to be able to start with the implementation program and ensure that within whichever political context you have, that the Parliament of South Africa, for example, starts to pass certain laws that make it possible for a BRICS context for us to be able to function in that regard. Similar to what we have with the ICC, for example, that once you've signed those international protocols, you know that they become effectively cast in stone and iron. They are not very easy to undo, but that will be important to secure us. The point, of course, being made is, why do you want to be in BRICS, taking into account some of these challenges? Is 42% of the world's population, 29% of the world's GDP sits in the BRICS countries. We, of course, have to then say, as South Africa, how do we ensure that we can maximize? So what I'm finding not happening is that within our own government and even within cabinet, there doesn't seem to be that, perhaps maybe that decisiveness in terms of thought and action of ensuring that, of course, we can use this multilateral organization. Take into account the New Development Bank, for example. If you look at the loans that they have dispensed, South Africa has got the least. India has got 35%, South Africa has got 7% of the loans that have been dispensed today. And yet we have a first regional office of the New Development Bank here in South Africa. So something that tells you, taking into account that on an equity basis, we have all contributed equally, 20% equity across all the countries. So these are the things that I think we have to have as often a discussion on how we can be able to use BRICS. And in the context of the earlier conversation here in the studio on black economic empowerment, how do we then ensure that we can have indigenous homegrown industries that are manufacturing and start to supply this vast market of almost 3 billion people.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tepo, for those insights, and thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.